Chapter 4 Little White Lies. It took Luce a couple of minutes of embracing her mother to realize Amity was still standing on the sidewalk, rubbing her left arm awkwardly as she faced the ground. "I'll tell you everything, okay?" Or, well, Luce would tell her mom everything that she could tell her without mentioning the boiling aisles, or magic, or the fact that she never actually went to camp. "But first, there's someone I'd like you to meet. Be right back." Before her mom could reply, Luce walked up to Amity again. "Hey, you coming?" Luce faltered when she realized how upset her friend looked. Amity was extremely tense. She didn't even look up when Luce tapped her shoulder. "Are you okay?" She definitely didn't look okay. Amity bit her lip and took a moment to wipe the tears off her cheeks before she lifted her head and faced Luce, thinking of her own parents stung in the worst way possible. But this wasn't the time nor the place to discuss that. "Fine! I'm fine." She rubbed the back of her neck. The first word came out too fast, but the second sentence already sounded a lot more believable. "I just really want your mom to like me." That wasn't even a lie. She was really nervous about that. It just wasn't the whole story. Luce looked at her friend with sparkling eyes and a smile so bright that it turned Amity's brain to mush. "Aw, Amity, don't worry about that so much. I know she'll like you." Amity remained unconvinced and nervous. Really, really nervous. "But what if she doesn't? What if she hates me?" Luce squeezed her shoulder encouragingly. "She's not going to hate you. But it's cute that you're so nervous." That got a blush out of Amity, who then took a moment to clear her throat and close her eyes to take a deep breath. She sighed. "Okay, I'm coming." She couldn't avoid this meeting forever, after all. Could she? "Pull yourself together. You can do this. You can do this. You can do this. This is just your crush's mom, and you have to impress her because if you don't, she's going to hate you, and then Luce is going to hate you, and then you'll never get to kiss her. No pressure." A part of Amity just wanted to turn on her heel and run away. But Luce was looking at her so expectantly, and Amity didn't want to disappoint her crush. That and Amity was pretty sure she'd actually get eaten by one of these human realm monsters she knew nothing about this time if she actually ran. She was completely lost in her thoughts as she moved towards the house, not paying the slightest bit of attention to anything else because she was so nervous. And then she tripped. That she didn't fall was mostly due to Luce's quick reaction, who was able to catch her just in time. And I thought I was a klutz in this friendship," Luce joked as she let go of Amity after she had managed to steady herself again. "Phew! That was a little too close for comfort." Amity stood frozen in place for a moment and didn't say a word. She would have been more excited about Luce holding her for a few seconds if she hadn't been so mortified about the fact that Luce's mom had just seen all that. "Oh, Titan, she's going to hate me. She's going to hate me. She probably already hates me." Annie couldn't remember ever being this nervous about anything in her entire life. Why was she so good at embarrassing herself in front of people when it really mattered? Luce smiled at her mom when she and Amity walked up to her. Camilla looked at them in surprise and a tad bit of confusion as she waved slightly. She'd hoped Luce would make some friends at camp, but she hadn't expected her daughter to bring one home. Still, Luce's happy enthusiasm as she introduced her friend made her mother smile. "Mom, this is my friend Amity. Amity, this is my mom Camilla." Luce gestured from Amity to her mom and then back at Amity. "Hi!" Amity's voice was way too high-pitched, and she gave Camilla the most forced, unnatural grin imaginable. She stayed frozen like that for a couple of seconds, not sure if anyone was expecting her to say anything else. Then she spoke up again. "I'm Amity!" Amity's voice got squeakier with every word she said. Then she remembered that Luz had already introduced her and just wished for the ground to open up beneath her and swallow her whole. Nice to meet you? Camila raised an eyebrow, a little bit amused by how nervous the girl obviously was. Luz put a hand around her friend's waist to calm her down. And it did. But Amity was also struggling not to flinch because Luz's arm was touching her back. She wasn't sure when it had started to hurt this much. But she put on a brave face and went back to trying not to embarrass herself in front of Luz's mom even more than she already had. Nice to meet you too! Amity said it too fast again and continued to give Camila that forced smile. I met her at camp. Luz smiled at Amity and then looked back at Camila as she continued. I know it's short notice, but can she stay here tonight? Camila blinked in surprise. Luz? Her daughter didn't let her finish. Before you say no, there's actually a pretty good reason why it would be kinda great if she could stay here tonight. Oh? Amity was just as surprised as Camila was. Sure, Luz had gone over some of the basics with her, like what exactly the camp was that they'd supposedly attended. But she couldn't remember Luz ever mentioning anything about a reason for the last-minute sleepover. I don't know if you've noticed, but Amity kind of doesn't have any luggage with her. Well, there's a reason for that. Luz wasn't sure when exactly she had come up with a story, but she was rolling with it now. Amity's suitcase was stolen earlier. We don't know exactly when it happened, but at some point during a drive home, we both took a short nap, and when we woke up again, it was gone. Just like that. The worst thing about that is probably that her plane ticket was in there, so now she can't get home. The only thing she still has with her is her phone because that was in her pocket, but she still hasn't been able to reach her parents yet. Amity didn't know what more than half of these things were, but she just went along with what Luz was saying and nodded when it felt appropriate. Sounds like you've had quite the day, huh? Camila gave Amity a warm smile. No wonder the poor girl was so tense. She probably would have been okay with Amity staying the night either way despite the short notice, as long as her parents were. But she wouldn't say no now. A warning would be nice next time. But of course she can stay here tonight. Just keep trying to reach your parents, okay, Amity? Amity just nodded shyly and prayed to the Titan silently that her parents would never find out about what had happened. She'd be in huge trouble if they did. You're the best. Luz hugged her mom again. Camila smiled as she hugged her daughter back. All right, now come on in, you two. And Amity? Don't worry, I promise I don't bite. Amity looked at Luz in horror as they followed her mother inside. That's a thing here? She had a hard time keeping her voice down because of how freaked out she was. Luz could barely keep herself from laughing out loud. No, it's not, it's just a saying, she whispered. Believe me, if we had any greeting ritual that involved biting, I would have given you a warning. Amity exhaled loudly and relaxed a little as they stepped inside. The house was nice. There was a lot of things missing that she would have expected from a Boiling Isles home. No laughing teacups or moving paintings or flying lamps, and something inside her ached at the lack of magic. But it was comfy and cute and she liked it. It also smelled really nice, and Amity felt her mouth water. It smelled unlike any food she knew, and she heard her stomach rumble at the prospect of food. Luz elbowed her friend. Sounds like someone's hungry. Amity crossed her arms. Well, yeah. Can you blame me? I mean, it's not my fault someone decided to steal my lunch. That someone was actually Luz, and she hadn't really stolen it, they'd shared. But Camila, of course, assumed Amity was referring to her stolen bag. Since Luz didn't warn me she would bring someone, I only bought food for 2 people. But I'm sure we'll find something for you. What do you like to eat? Amity froze. She didn't know any of the food they ate here, so whatever she answered, it wouldn't end well. Actually, she gave part of what you got for me. I'm not that hungry anyway. Luce chimed in and smiled at Amity as they stepped into the dining room. She could already tell what her mom had bought from the smell alone. Sit down, yeah? I'll go get a knife to cut the sandwich and an extra plate. Okay. Amity sat down at the table and stared at the food. It looked as good as it smelled. But as nice as the house and food looked, she still felt like an intruder. She stayed mostly silent until Luce returned with the third plate and a knife and sat down in between Amity and her mom. She cut her sandwich in half and put one of the halves on the new plate. Here you go! Luce set the plate down in front of Amity and lowered her voice a bit as she added, I know it's not the kind of food you usually eat, but I hope you like it anyway. Thanks. And I'm sure I will. She smiled shyly in the direction of Luce and her mom as she bit into the sandwich for the first time. Titan, this is amazing! Amity ate her half of the sandwich, mostly in silence, and whatever it was that was in this, it tasted amazing, and Amity needed more of it at some point in the future, until eventually it was all gone and she wasn't hungry anymore. Luce, on the other hand, was very, very occupied with talking to her mother and barely focused on the food at all, despite enjoying it a lot. The conversation went surprisingly well, and there wasn't a single instance where her mother seemed to doubt that she'd actually been at camp. At least this was partly due to the fact that Luce had actually bothered to look up what she'd have learned at camp if she'd actually gone there, and she'd spent the last 2 weeks on the boiling aisles studying the basics so her mom wouldn't get suspicious. Because of that, she also knew which pictures she could and which pictures she couldn't show to her mom. She'd even made a specific folder to that. Over her glorious years of making AMVs, Luce had eventually gotten pretty decent at editing, and she wasn't so bad at photoshopping either. So now, she had a bunch of pictures of her and her friends in camp that she could show to her mom. Since she edited the pictures so that the ears of her friends looked human, she could stay relatively close to the truth and actually talk about the friends she'd really made over the summer instead of just making something up entirely. Gus had been really excited about the edited pictures where he looked human and had immediately created copies of them so he could put them up on his wall. She didn't show her mom a single photo from school for obvious reasons. Sure, there were buildings on the campgrounds there, but they were, of course, way smaller than Hexside and also less weird. Luce trusted herself to edit out at least some of the weirdness from the pictures, but there was so much at Hexside that seemed pretty much impossible. Luce had made sure to take some photos outside and in the woods that surrounded the owl house to make sure it looked like the camp was. Well, actually a camp. But she also sprinkled in as many of the regular photos she'd taken over the summer, provided she'd been able to make them look more normal relatively easily. That's Gus. This is Willow, and look, here's one with Amity. Camila was pleasantly surprised. Wow, you really made a lot of friends there, didn't you? Luce nodded and smiled. They're all really amazing, she sighed. It hasn't even been a day, and I miss them already. You have their numbers, right? Even if they don't live anywhere close, that means you can still write to them and call them anytime you want, Camila said in an attempt to cheer her daughter up a little. Just like we did all summer with the texts and the letters. There was an alarm bell that went off inside Luce's head at the word letters, but she just kind of shrugged it off. Her mom was probably just getting something mixed up. She hadn't sent any letters, after all. Yeah, I guess. But it's not the same. I can't exactly hug anyone through the phone. I wouldn't have missed hugging you all summer if I could, after all. Oh, Mija, you're going to make me cry. Camila pulled her daughter into another hug. Oh, how she missed Luce. Guilt about her decision to send her daughter to camp had been eating away at Camila for the past 3 months. And even though Luce had told her she was having fun at camp, there had always been a flicker of doubt in the back of Camila's mind that her daughter was just telling her what she wanted to hear. But Luce looked genuinely happy in the pictures. Camila hadn't seen her child this happy for as long as she could remember, and Luz's bright smiles in the different pictures warmed her mother's heart. Camila wanted her daughter to be happy. She really did. And it wasn't like she really wanted to change who Luz was as a person by sending her to camp. She was just worried. Worried that one day Luz's impulsiveness would get her into a lot of trouble and lead to herself or someone else getting severely hurt. Camila couldn't bear thinking about that. Luz was all the world to her mother. If anything had happened to her, she shuddered. For what it was worth, something about Luz did seem different now that she was back. Although how much exactly she had changed was hard to tell since she'd only been back for such a short time. She was definitely still Luz, but she seemed a little more grown up. Maybe the last couple of months had been exactly what she needed. The other teens on the pictures looked nice too, and Luz had a lot of good things to say about most of them that drew really sympathetic pictures of them. Apparently, Luz had befriended one of the chaperones who sounded like she was an interesting person from the way Luz described her. All in all, Camila got the impression that Luz had learned a lot, made a bunch of friends, and became happier over the summer. That was everything that Camila had wished for and so much more. It sounds like you had a great summer. Luz beamed. I really had. She scrolled through more of the photos and showed her mom pictures of herself with the troublemakers and best friends and Ida. Luz felt happy when looking at the pictures and showing them to her mom, but that wasn't all she felt. Slowly but steadily, more and more guilt was creeping into the back of Luz's mind, and it got worse with every little harmless lie that she told. Maybe lying to her mom about so many things was bad. But she and Amity couldn't exactly tell Camila what really happened, could they? Luz was still planning to tell her mother about everything eventually, but not yet. She was still too afraid of her mother forbidding her from ever going back to the bowling aisles when she found out the truth. And Luz also didn't want to get into a fight with her mom so shortly after she'd gotten back, especially not with Amity around to see it. Luz didn't want her friend to witness that, especially because it was possible for Amity to get caught in the crossfire, despite none of this being her fault. Amity remained mostly silent while Luz was talking to her mother. Even after the green-haired witch had finished her meal, she just glanced at the photos every now and again and answered questions when she was directly spoken to rather than initiating a conversation herself. Her answers were usually as short as possible because she didn't want to say anything that might accidentally give away that what Luz was telling her mother was at least partly made up. And Amity also figured the less she spoke, the less she could seem like an idiot from her answers. Aside from the bits of conversation Amity heard and actively participated in, she spent the time glancing around the room. She spotted some really adorable photos of Luz as a child which held her attention prisoner for a while, and afterwards, she spent a lot of time looking at different kinds of strange devices and thinking about what they might be for. Most of her guesses were probably complete nonsense, but it helped her pass the time and not focus on how hard it was for her to watch how genuinely Camila cared about her daughter when Amity herself hadn't felt like her parents cared about anything but her success in years. Sometimes she felt like she was less like a daughter to them than an achievement they could show off to their friends. The thought made her feel sick, and for some reason, no matter how hard she tried, she never quite seemed to escape it. Luz didn't miss the fact that her friend was upset for very long. Hey Mom, is it okay if we continue this some other time? Luz glanced at Amity and her mother nodded. Of course. Camila had tried her best to include Luz's friend in the conversation, but it was obvious enough that Amity's mind was elsewhere. It was clear that she was tense from the way she was sitting, and Camila hadn't missed that the girl looked upset. Giving Amity and Luz some alone time was probably the best the adult could do for them right now. Luz got up to put the plates in the dishwasher, then tapped on her friend's shoulder. The green-haired witch was still having a hard time keeping it together when she lifted her head. Luz offered her a hand. Come on, Amity, let me show you around. They'd just left the dining room when Luce came to a sudden halt and looked directly at Amity. What's wrong? Did I make you feel excluded? I'm sorry. Amity shook her head. It's not that, she sighed. I don't really want to talk about it right now. I don't want to think about it anymore. Is that okay? Sure. Luce smiled at her and squeezed her hand. Just remember that I'm there for you if you do ever want to talk. I will. And thank you, Luce. Even if she couldn't always find the words and the strength to talk about everything, that Luce was there to listen if she ever did meant the world to Amity. Of course. Now come on. I'll show you around. That should distract you a bit. After a quick tour of the house, humans really had a lot of strange stuff. Luce led Amity into her bedroom. After the green-haired witch was done gushing about the Azora merch, it took a while for that to happen, gestured for her friend to sit down on the bed. She did, and Luce sat down next to her. Your room is amazing, Amity exclaimed, still completely in awe. Aw, thank you. Luce blushed a bit. Make yourself at home, okay? Amity nodded and looked around the room, and was really excited to finally ask about some of the things she didn't recognize and was curious about. She picked up something from the nightstand that looked like it was two small knobs on a string and held it towards Luce. What's this for? Luce smiled when she realized her friend had picked up her headphones. I'll show you. Wait. She plugged the headphones into her phone and handed them to Amity. You put them into your ears like this. And then you just press the play button on your cell phone and you'll hear music. Wanna try? She waited for her friend to nod before she turned on the music. Amity yelped and threw the headphones across the room. What kind of human torture device is that? She shrieked. They're just headphones. They're for listening to music. Luce picked them up off the floor and put them on, and then she realized why her friend had reacted the way she had. Oh, right. I set them to full volume. She bit her lip and carefully reached out to touch Amity's ears. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to. Does it hurt very much? Ow. A little. That Amity's head was still throbbing a bit from earlier wasn't really helping either. But at least Luce touching her ears felt nice. But I'll be okay. Just don't make me put these things back on again, alright? Of course. Sorry. Luce disconnected the headphones and put the phone on the table to play the music through the speaker instead. Is that okay? Amity closed her eyes for a moment to take the music in, and eventually she started tapping her fingers to the beat. Oh, this is actually kinda nice. Now that the music wasn't out to kill her ears anymore, she found herself liking the sound. It wasn't the kinds of magic music she was used to, but it still sounded pretty good. And the sound almost had its own magic to it, despite technically not being magic at all. But she still didn't understand why her friend would turn her small music ear thing into a straight-up torture device. Why would you turn the music up so loud that it hurts? Luce had not been expecting that question. She froze for a second, and when she did say something, she said it quietly and in a weirdly uncharacteristic monotone voice. Loud music drowns out the noise in my head when I'm down. Amity rarely ever saw her little ball of light be anything but that. And despite not knowing what it was that made Luce feel sad, it tugged at Amity's heartstrings. The green-haired witch put a comforting hand around her friend's shoulder. Do you want to talk about it? Luce shook her head. No, not right now. The smile she gave Amity now was weak, but at least it seemed genuine again. But, thank you. Amity smiled at Luce and rubbed her shoulder. Anytime. She would have taken on the world with Luce if it had made her feel at least a little better. Luce was the most amazing person Amity had ever met. She, of all people, deserved to be happy. Luce leaned into Amity's embrace and let her head sink onto her friend's shoulder, pushing the upsetting thoughts that explanation had caused to the back of her head as she leaned against Amity, taking in her nice flowery scent. It relaxed her and made her feel warm inside. The two witches sat there like that, unmoving, just listening to the soft, not deafening music for what felt like the world's most wonderful eternity. After Amity had overcome the first and second and third shock about the fact that Luce was so close to her, the blush slowly vanished from her face, and she was able to breathe properly and just be comfortable and happy. And it felt great. Holding Luce like that was quite possibly the most amazing feeling imaginable. Luce's gentle hugs and soft touches were something that Amity still wasn't entirely used to. Physical comfort had never been a huge thing between her and her parents. Actually, any kind of comfort hadn't really been her parents' style. Bites needed to be the best. If they fell, they got back up again, steadied themselves, and sucked it up. No crying, not showing any weakness. Ever. There was this one event that had been burned into her mind especially well. Amity had fallen off the slide in their backyard when she was about 5. She remembered being in pain, her head spinning, and the twins' blurry faces and how they'd try to comfort her and tell her that she'd be okay. And then her mother had come outside and scolded the twins for attempting to calm their younger sibling down. Shoo, you two. Your sister doesn't need your pity. She'll take the opportunity to learn that her actions have consequences and that she needs to be more careful in the future. Right, Amity? Now come on. I will take you to a healer. You'll know better next time. Amity still shuddered at the memory. What a nice thing to say to a little kid with a bad concussion and a broken arm. But Luce was so different from the people Amity had grown up with, never too shy to show her she cared. She held Amity's hand in the healer's office after she'd broken her leg and stayed with Amity as long as she was allowed to, just to distract her. Every minute she spent with Luce, Amity felt herself falling harder for her friend. And sitting next to her like that, maybe she'd find the courage to actually tell her. She closed her eyes for a moment and took a deep breath. Then her hand found Luce's and squeezed it slightly. Hey, Luce? The human witch lifted her head for what might have been the first time in at least half an hour to look at Amity. Everything okay? Amity smiled at her shyly. Perfect. More than perfect. There's just something I need to talk to you about. The green-haired witch was interrupted by the door swinging open. Camila was standing in the doorframe, looking at the two of them apologetically, holding some bedding and a bunch of pillows in her arms. Sorry about the interruption, you two. I just thought Amity would need something to sleep in. Amity recoiled, letting go of her friend's hand and moved a bit away from Luce, her face turning beet red. Hi, Miss Noseda! She grinned awkwardly and waved a bit. Camila raised an eyebrow at her daughter's friend in amusement, but remained silent. Luce, who somehow managed to miss all of this, got up immediately and took the bedding from her mother. She was in a really good mood after all the cuddling. Oh, right! Almost forgot! Thanks, Mom! Seeing Luce so happy made her mother smile. Of course! Do you two need anything else? Camila glanced at Amity. Is she okay? Is there a reason why she's still wearing the beanie? She's just a bit cold, I think. Another white lie. That was okay, right? I'm going to turn up the heating a bit. Good call. The knowing smile her mom gave Luce confused her a lot. But she still shrugged it off when Camila continued. Don't stay up too long, yeah? Lo pimento, mommy. Actually, she turned to Amity. What do you say we get ready for bed? We don't actually have to sleep yet, but it can't hurt to change and brush our teeth already, right? Amity nodded. That's probably a good idea. The only one that actually ended up changing right away was Luce. They picked out some pajamas for Amity, but decided that she should probably brush her teeth before she changed, because walking around the house meant that Camila could see them, and Amity couldn't exactly keep wearing the beanie when she was in her pajamas. At least not without Camila becoming at least a little suspicious. After they'd stepped into the bathroom, Luce took about 10 minutes to turn it upside down for a toothbrush Amity could use. We should have spare ones around here somewhere. The human girl rummaged through the small cupboard until she found what she was looking for, an open package with 2 out of 3 toothbrushes still left inside. Here you go, just pick one of these. She handed Amity the package while the human girl picked up her own electric toothbrush from its stand and put toothpaste on it. This will taste very weird compared to the stuff you guys have on the bowling aisles, but I promise it works all the same. Amity was just about to take a toothbrush out of the package when a weird, threatening noise from next to her made her turn around. Luce! No! Amity watched with pure horror in her eyes as Luce lifted her toothbrush to her mouth. The green-haired witch immediately dropped everything she was holding and was barely able to knock the toothbrush out of Luce's hand before the human actually put it inside her mouth. It landed on the floor with a clattering noise. Good! Now stay away from her! Huh? Luce was too perplexed to actually say anything. She just stared at her empty hand for a few seconds, which was still raised halfway to her mouth. Amity placed herself protectively in between Luce and the toothbrush. Careful, Luce. No sudden movements, or it will attack. Amity sounded dead serious and extremely worried. Luce, who had finally managed to overcome her surprise, raised an eyebrow. She was a bit amused by what was happening, but she was also extremely confused. Amity? This is really sweet, but why exactly are you protecting me from my own toothbrush? Amity looked at the toothbrush on the floor, then at her friend, then back at the toothbrush. How could Luce not see this? It's clearly possessed! Look at it! It's vibrating! Had Amity been too slow? Had the toothbrush already bewitched her friend? Oh no. Luce couldn't help but laugh. Of course it's vibrating. That's the whole point. It's an electric toothbrush. She somehow kept forgetting that there were a bunch of things in the human realm that Amity didn't know and couldn't understand, which led to her coming to very wrong conclusions. This isn't funny, Luce. Amity was freaking out. The toothbrush was still vibrating on the floor and showed no sign of surrender. Toothbrush demons are dangerous. Toothbrush what? King had told Luce about all kinds of demons during her time on the bowling aisles, but she couldn't remember anything about toothbrushes ever being mentioned. And that didn't sound like the kind of thing she'd forget. Amity didn't reply. Instead, she started growling at the toothbrush. Stay away from Luce, you hear me? I won't let you hurt her! Thank God Mom's watching the news downstairs. That would have been hard to explain. Luce mumbled, extremely amused and also kind of touched. There they were, in the middle of the bathroom, Amity standing protectively in front of Luce as she yelled at the toothbrush, and Luce couldn't help but think this was the most adorable thing she'd ever seen. She felt weirdly happy about Amity trying to protect her despite the fact that said protection was completely unnecessary in this specific situation. It was very cute. Amity was about to cast a spell on the toothbrush, then thankfully thought better of it. Camille would not have been thrilled with a giant hole in the floor and just kicked the toothbrush against the bathroom wall. It didn't put up as much of a fight as she expected it to, but she figured it was just trying to hide its true power to trick them and kicked it against the wall a second time, then a third, then a fourth. Die, toothbrush demon, die! Eventually, she hit the on-off button with her foot by pure coincidence. Good! And stay dead! Luce was still chuckling a bit. Amity? But Amity wasn't listening. She stepped closer to Luce and cupped her face in her hands, examining it. Are you alright? Did the demon hurt you? She wasn't able to find any injury at first and second glance, which was a relief, but she was still waiting for Luce's reply. Maybe she sustained an injury that Amity just couldn't see. While Amity herself was so occupied with worrying about Luce that she failed to notice it so far, Luce had no trouble noticing how close their faces were to each other. Amity's nose was barely an inch away from touching Luce's own, and Luce felt her heart flutter in her chest at the way her friend gently touched her face. The closer Amity got to Luce in order to examine her face, the redder Luce went. She managed to stay cool around Amity most of the time, but right now, her usual calm had gone out the window. For a few seconds, all Luce could think about was leaning forward and kissing the girl that she'd just seen shout at a toothbrush a moment ago. But she couldn't just do that, could she? Never better. It might have been Luce's breath on Amity's cheek, or the fact that her voice seemed a bit louder than usual. Amity couldn't tell exactly, but whatever the reason was, the green-haired witch had been snapped out of her worried trance and had finally realized how close her face was to Luce's. Amity's face turned even redder than that of her crush currently was, which was really saying something, and she was so startled that she stumbled backwards and almost fell over. The only reason that she didn't was that she managed to hold onto the sink just barely. "I'm sorry, I got carried away, and..." Luce reached for her hand. "Careful there. Please try not to hurt yourself, okay?" Amity intertwined her fingers with Luce's as her friend helped her steady herself some more. "You're a bit of a klutz today, huh? Are you okay? This is already the third time you almost got hurt." Amity sighed. "I don't know. I'm a bit out of it. I guess we've both just had a really long day." "You can say that again." Luce handed her friend one of the spare toothbrushes from the package Amity had dropped into the sink. "This one doesn't vibrate, I promise." She then put her own electric toothbrush back onto the shelf and switched to the third one from the package. There was no need to freak Amity out even more today. They both brushed their teeth next to each other silently, both still a slight blush on their face, neither of them speaking until eventually Luce put hers down and cleaned it. "Okay, that should be enough. Let's go back to my room so you can change." She turned to leave the room. Amity glared at the toothbrush one more time. "I've got my eye on you." As fate would have it, Luce hadn't placed the toothbrush on the shelf very steadily earlier, which resulted in the dang thing falling down as Luce exited the room. Amity yelped and ran after her friend, suddenly not quite as courageous anymore. "Wait up!" End of chapter 4.